Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the second day of the Safety Summit. My name is Corina Shtebey, and I am the Safety and Advanced Air Mobility Manager at EBAA. I have the great pleasure of being your host today. And without further ado, I would like to kick off today's meeting by thanking our long-term sponsors, Bombardier, Dassault Aviation, and Gulfstream for their support. This is already the second year that we're organizing this event, unfortunately in a virtual setting, but still our main sponsors have always been by our side and ready to support us to continue promoting safety. And before I announce the first session, I would just like to go a bit through a few administrative aspects. This event will be recorded video and audio. As you might have noticed already, the attendees will have their cameras and their microphones off throughout the duration of the event. But if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tool. We actually encourage you to use the Q&A tool, and you also have a chat function, which you can use to interact with each other and with our panelists today. And if you have any questions that we didn't get to, or maybe questions that you think about after we finish today's meeting, please feel free to send us your questions at safety@ebaa.org. We will get in touch with our speakers and we will get back with some answers as soon as possible. And now I would like to thank once again our sponsors and introduce our first session for today, the third session in the program of the Virtual Safety Summit. We are going to discuss today with Hervé Julien, Air Operations Expert at EASA, and Mark Bowmans, Quality, Health, Safety, Security, and Environment Manager at Shell Aircraft, about operational excellence in internal auditing. And I will now like to give the floor to Hervé to start off the session with his presentation. Hervé, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Corina. So let me share my screen first. Okay, can you see the screen, Corina? I guess yes. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the nice introduction, Corina, and thanks to EBAA for the opportunity to talk at this event. So just a few words to introduce my presentation. I've been asked some time ago to participate to this panel dealing with Threatline Auditing. So I first asked myself, what is this new animal? I've never heard about that. And I even consulted some colleagues who are specifically in charge of SMS matters. And none of them were able to give me a single answer on what was Threatline Auditing. So I contacted Mark, who will give a presentation just after me, to get some information. So now I would say a clearer view. And I prepared my presentation so that it introduces Mark's presentation. The idea is to give you some information on what we have currently in the EASA regulation regarding compliance monitoring function and safety risk management, and to show you that basically so this concept of Threatline Auditing is already in a way including in the current requirements, and at least we have all the enablers to allow such activity to be conducted. So my presentation will be quite short, as you will notice, since it's mostly focusing on the concept itself. And then later, Mark will present some practical example on how they implemented this concept. So I think before starting with the regulation, there's a slide I like personally very much, which is nicely introducing the topic. So if we present the area in which rules are applicable and in which the operator is, let's say, operating, and the area where any type of operations which is outside the rule is considered to be unsafe. So in principle, of course, we would like rules to cover all unsafe situations. Unfortunately, this is not the case. So our regulators, of course, want always to have the blue circle cover the red cycle, theoretically it's possible, but practically speaking, it would mean such a level of prescriptive rule which would almost prevent operation. This is why basically the rule can't capture all the risk linked with operation of aircraft. So the first part, the part in blue, is basically compliance. So this is to show that compliance in itself is not sufficient to ensure the safety of operations. We need an extra bit basically to ensure the safety. So then, just to complement as well this slide, on the left part, something which is covered by rules, but at the same time, it's not addressing an unsafe situation. It's where the rules are considered to be ineffective. Of course, we try to reduce as well this area. And effectiveness is, of course, where the rules are addressing a specific risk within the unsafe environment. So compliance is within the blue cycle, and everything which is outside is considered, within the red cycle at least, it's considered to be risk management. Within this risk management part, we consider two types of risk. So generic one, which are basically applicable to all types of operations, all operators. There are quite a lot of them, of course. And then we have the specific risk, which are very specific to the type of operations of a specific operator or to the organization, to the size, to the type of aircraft as well operated. So there are many factors which have an influence of on those risks. So as you can see, rules are of course designed to address generic risk, and to have this extra bit to ensure the safety of operations. Of course, you have to capture those safety risks, and this is what is considered under risk management. And the green arrow I mentioned earlier is, of course, the willingness of regulator to have as much as possible risk covered by rules. And of course, the red part is the not covered by blue circle, is the effectiveness of the SMS, where it's able to capture those specific risks which can't be captured by rules. So now coming back to a regulation. So I'll start with the high-level one. So the implementing rule we have in Orogen 200, so applicable to complex, non-commercial complex operators and commercial transport operators. Basically, in paragraph A3, it requires the operator to identify safety hazards which are linked with its activities. So any safety hazard which might have a safety impact on its operations should be identified. They should be evaluated, and the risk linked with those hazards, so basically the consequences of those hazards, should be managed. So, and this management deals is related to the mitigation of such risks. So definition of mitigations to lower the severity of the consequences, or to lower the frequency of occurrence. And as well, something important, the last bit of this sentence, to verify their effectiveness. So it's not only a matter of definition of mitigation to lower some risk, it's as well to verify on a regular basis, we'll see that, whether those mitigations which have been defined achieve the expected results. So now I will focus on the specific AMC which is dealing with safety risk management within our regulation. This specific AMC considers several elements within the safety risk management process of an operator. Of course, as I mentioned, the hazard identification process, which is quite known and let's say not easy, but at least something which is well understood. Then, of course, the risk assessment. So with a starting point from a hazard, you identify the consequences, and depending on the level of the risk at the end of the evaluation, you determine whether some mitigations are necessary or not to lower the residual risk. Then there's a process related to management of change, of course, to determine and to assess changes, and determine whether those changes might have a safety impact on the operation of the aircraft, and so whether they are introducing additional risk. Of course, there's a process related to internal safety investigation related to occurrences mostly, but not only, it could be to any other issue. An emergency response plan to address emergency situations. And finally, there are two elements. First, the continuous improvement process. And there's a list of items which are to be included in this continuous improvement process. One of them is related to the conduct of reactive evaluation in order to verify the effectiveness of the system. Here we are talking about the systems for the control and mitigation of risk. So here, the operator has to improve this system of controlling and mitigating risk. And then the second element, which is the most important in the context of this slot and the context of this topic of Threatline auditing, is safety performance monitoring and measurement. And I'll go into more detail on this one. So SPMM is safety performance monitoring and measurement. This acronym doesn't exist. I just invented it. So it includes a few elements. I won't enter into detail because it's a bit outside of the scope of the presentation. So safety reporting, of course, to get information, safety studies on some specific issues, some safety reviews as well to address as well changes. But then there are two additional elements which are very important. First of all, it should include safety audits, which have to focus on the integrity of operators' management system, and most importantly, periodically assess the status of safety risk control. So it's important that within this safety performance monitoring and measurement, there's a process to assess the risk control which have been put in place by the operator. And then the second element, which is related to safety survey, which is about examining a specific element of a procedure and to get some information, as well perception and opinions on operational personnel or on so specific issues or bottleneck or procedures. So those two concepts, please keep them in mind because they are, I think, well introducing what Mark will present during the next presentation. But what is important is really to clearly remember that when you establish safety risk control or mitigations, it's not only a one-off exercise which need to be done, let's say, to satisfy your regulator, your authority at the beginning of the operations or following a change of your operations, but it's something which needs to be maintained and reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that all those controls and mitigation achieve the expected outcome. Now, I will deal with something which is a little bit linked. It's about contracting. I think all operators are contracting some activities. The level of contracting, of course, is changing from one operator to another. But I think all operators are faced with this specific requirement related to contracting. And we have a specific implementing rule in Orogen 205. And it's important to note that the two levels I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation are clearly stated. So first of all, the operator has to ensure, of course, that the contracted activity is compliant with the applicable regulation. So this is the compliance part, which is a prerequisite. Nothing can be done without the initial project to be compliant. And then the second layer, it's about those hazards which are linked with the activities which have been contracted. So the operator has to consider those hazards within its operator's management system. So you may ask yourself, what does it mean with considered? So as a minimum, of course, the operator has to know, has to have some knowledge of those hazards. The consequences of those hazards should be known, of course, should have been evaluated, and the level of risk assessed. And of course, this leads directly to the residual level of risk, which should be known based on the mitigation which have been defined. And as well, same principle than for its own hazard identification process, the effectiveness of the mitigations should be monitored by the operators and known, of course. And then to conclude on this, and with a link with the safety risk management process, I have a slide presenting the two scenarios possible for an operator which is contracting some activity to third-party providers. There are two possible cases, basically. Either the contractor has an SMS or it doesn't have an SMS because, for example, it's not required, it is not subject to a regulation or is not subject to certification, and or within this regulation, there's no requirement for an SMS. So he's not obliged to. He may, of course, decide to implement an SMS, but it might not be mandatory. So in the first case, when the contractor has not implemented an SMS, then, of course, going back to the requirement we saw just before, all the activities of the contractor have to be included into the operator's safety risk management process. So basically, the operator has to conduct an hazard identification exercise as well, safety risk management, so assessing the evaluation of, assessing the risk and the need for mitigations, and of course, the monitoring of effectiveness of the mitigation. This has to be done in any case. In the second case, of course, if a contractor has already an SMS, he might have adequately conducted all those activities. So as a minimum, what we expect from the operator is to consider the output of the contractor's safety risk management process. So basically, what are the risks stemming with the activities of the contractors, which might impact the safety of the operator's activities. So those, this outcome, of course, this output is introduced in the operator's, of course, hazard identification and risk management process. And of course, as for the first case where the contractor didn't have an SMS, the monitoring of effectiveness of those mitigations which have been defined and implemented by the contractor has to be done. And most of the time during the audit of the contractor's SMS, because you have the obligation at least to monitor your contractors, depending of course on the activities they are conducting. And during this audit, this is the best tool to perform this monitoring of effectiveness. So these are two, of course, standard cases. There could be some different combination, depending as well on contractual provisions. I mean, this is standard, but within the contract between the operator and the contractor, there might be some additional prescriptive requirement for the operator or for the contractor. So I will conclude with this slide. So my conclusion based on the topic which will be introduced by Mark is that we have already in the regulation all the enablers for such threat line auditing. It's not clearly defined this way in the regulation, but it's addressed in a way, and at least the objective of such activities is already defined in the regulation. And I think I will conclude, and I think we'll take questions after the presentation of Mark, if any. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hervé, for your setting the scene. Thank you very much for that. And let me also try to share my screen then. So we go into Threatline Auditing. Can you see my screen? Yep, I see you're nodding. Yes. So thank you very much for joining the session about Threatline Auditing. I would never have expected to see so many persons dial in to probably not the most glamorous topic that we have in this conference. It is, as Hervé says, it's already in the regulation. However, what we try to show is the practical application we have done of SMS auditing in Shell aircraft, and basically also the journey we took to get there. So let me just introduce myself. My name is Mark Bouwmans. I'm the Quality and Safety Manager of Shell aircraft since 2016. And in my whole life, I never imagined to become a quality and safety manager for a fixing operation. However, here I am. And that means that I also I came from an aircraft design and airworthiness background, and that means that before I joined this position, I only was at the receiving end of internal auditing. And I never really questioned the why of internal auditing. What are we trying to achieve with those? So it took me a journey to get there, and I would like to show you that specific journey. When I took this position, I asked my predecessor, so how do we know that we run a safe and compliant operation? And basically he said, well, look at all the certificates we have on the wall and look at the limited amount of incident reports that we have in our system. We must be very safe. And I had a little bit of chronic unease about that. Not that I had the feeling that we're unsafe, but how do you prove that? And how do you make sure your SMS is actually working for you? So I took this a bit deeper and I tried to take a step back and get through how do we get where we are. I looked at the safety developments throughout the eras and the industry before us. And then we realized that we basically get there via a lot of quality processes. We went through the technical factors where we started improving aircraft based on the many crashes that we had in the past. We have seen that we had to make sure that within the cockpit, the crew was talking to each other through human factors. We also understand that between the departments in an organization, we need to understand what people are doing via the organizational factors. And those are basically all driven by quality improvements, by looking at the incidents, reactive, and fixing that and continue. By the turn of the century, I think we all realized that we need to do a bit more proactive, and we introduced safety management, where we looked at our risk, just as Hervé says, not only look at compliance, but also look at the operational risk that we face as an operator, and try to address those in a different type of manner. And I think in the last years, we looked at human behavior, of human performance, let me put it like that, to really understand where people are part of the system and how do they perform in there, and what are the risks, but also the opportunities in that specific concept. So taking this all into account, I had to take this in and also look at the requirements. Specifically, and Hervé already mentioned the oral, but also in the part 1.5, there are some audit requirements for the quality system. And that is an objective process to check all the aspects of the organization ability to carry out all maintenance to the required standard. And if you take that into consideration, then you say, okay, yes, compliance, we need to do that, but how does this marry up with the specific safety identification we have done? So then I start thinking about, okay, what is the desired output of an assurance plan? What is it what we're trying to get out as an organization? Of course, we want to make sure that we are in compliance with the requirements of the internal, international, and the standards that we signed up to keep us safe. Because fundamentally, I still believe that that regulation is written in blood. It is based on everything that gone wrong in the past, and we have tried to fix it. However, the thing that is really difficult is translate the requirement that we see in regulations back to the original threat. What was it that we ended up in this specific requirement, and how do I make sure we implement it in such a way it's actively working as a barrier in our SMS? We need to determine the effectiveness of the implemented system. That's as Hervé just mentioned, not only on the quality, but also more and more on the environmental and financial aspects. We go away from the safety management to the true management system of an organization. Lately, we really are into how understand how work is done versus how work is prescribed. In the old days, we looked at gaps. We looked at how work was described, and if we found on the work floor it was not done as it was described, there was a finding because the work was carried out incorrectly. We never questioned ourselves: was the process or procedure workable, and how do we meet that? We need to explore opportunities for improvement, because in the end, the whole game is that we learn, and that we are a learner organization, and we continuously try to achieve better and better. And of course, it's provide feedback to top management. How do we make sure that the issues that we face on the shop floor, in the cockpit, or in the cabin are feedback into the top management of the organization, so they can take the necessary step to make sure we have resources and people available to countermeasure those events. So a couple of years into this role, I also looked at the limitations of our quality system. So we had a lot of internal audits going on in our organization. But what you will see is that those processes, we look at processes in isolation. We don't link into to multiple processes that will keep us safe. It's one process at a time, a single barrier, and looking at the effectivity of those barriers. We need to convince people, and I remember that when I was still in a worthiness or in a design group, it was always the quality manager coming to ask difficult questions like a school teacher if you were doing your work correctly. So auditors are seen as police or school teachers. So how can we change that view? How can we make sure that we are part of the team and dare to make sure that they understand that we're there to make the system better? Compliance was a tick box exercise. What I just explained is that sometimes it's very difficult to understand the hazard of regulation, and that means that you comply just to comply. Make sure internal audits or external audits by regulators are okay. You get away with that. Because we are doing this type of process-based audits for so long now, the effectivity goes down. Everywhere you come, the auditees already know what you're going to ask. They know the questions, and it's very difficult to get the learning cycle continuing. The perception quality applies to the whole process, not just on the output. If you really go into the ISO standards of quality management, it's really about what the end product, if you can measure that, and if the measurement is the same as you intended to be. But however, if we want to understand that the quality needs to apply to the whole process from A to Z. And the old-fashioned process audit does not address the human performance elements that we are seeking nowadays to make sure that we understand why things are happening. So when this is a picture of the Shell aircraft SMS system, and this is how I found it, and everything was there when I went on seat. We had our leadership and commitment, we had our policies and objectives, we had the management change system in there, we did our investigate and learn, planning and procedures, risk management, organization and resources, assurance, management review, it was all there. However, the thing that was missing is that it was actually working for us. It was not delivering. It was not, the wheels were not connected, or not all connected, let me put it like that. We tried. We have seen that the risk management was predominantly with me, with the quality and safety manager, and a nice binder on my desk. But how do you make this live, and how do you make sure that everybody in the organization is aware of that, and more important, how do the people on the shop floor, the cockpit, and in the cabin are aware of how to manage the risk? Because in the end, they are our front line. They are the ones that actively, daily dealing with those risks. So in order to look at that, we first took assurance. So in order, we first need to make sure that we overcome this compliance issue, to make sure that we are compliant with the regulation, that we can show it to the regulation. And for that, last year, the year before, we introduced a new digital system. It's called Web Manuals, and it's got a compliance module. And it's really smart because it will list all the requirements that you sign up to. And every time there's a change, it will highlight what are the changes. And you as an owner need to verify if your compliance statement is still the same. For Shell Aircraft, we used to do this in an Excel sheet, and we are listing over 4,600 requirements, which meant that just making sure that we are compliant was a day job for a single person. It was not manageable, and the issue was that the persons who were actually owning those requirements were not actively involved in the compliance management, updating the Excel list. They were doing the manuals, but how do you make sure that the compliance meets the requirement? So with this new tool, we got our hands a little bit freed up, because now you will see that we have a system in place that is actively managing the change in regulations. And whenever there's a change, it will highlight it, it will flag up in our manuals where we have compliance, and if there's anything that we need to change. And if we need to change that, then it will flow down into our structure. And I will show you how that will work. So if we then go to the risk management, we also, on the risk management part, we need to make sure that the regulation, but also the rest of our risk management is captured in a single system. And for that system, we are using a hazard and effect management process. And it's basically a table listing all the hazards that we face as a shell aircraft. And this is just a snack of it. It's a huge list. And in this list, you will see both the regulatory threats. What we have done, we have looked at the regulation, and we have tried to consider what is a threat that could hurt us, and list them into the hazard and effect management process. And next to that, like Hervé just explained, we also looked at operational risks. So what is it that we still miss? And that come from everywhere. It can come from industry studies. It can come from our own incidents. It comes from people free thinking about what could happen to us, and we need to assess that. So in here you will see that we will assess it. What is the hazard? What is the top event? And from that, what are the mitigations and the risk classification, etc. All the way to show the residual risk. And for our higher risk, we use a system called the bow ties. I'm sorry, but it's a very much Shelly system. I think Shell was one of the early adopters of the bow ties, and we have been using them for about 20 years, I would say. And in this, for our higher risk, we are trying to break it down into manageable parts. So we try to understand what is the activity. So what is it that we need to do, what we cannot get away with without doing. And then we look at what is the hazard that is associated with that. So where can it go wrong? And what is the loss of control point that sits in the middle section of the bow tie? On the left-hand side, you will see our threats. So basically, the threats are the potentials that could release the top event. And on the right-hand side, you will see the consequences. What is in the event, what's going to hurt us. And in between, we can put in barriers to make sure that won't apply to us. So we're trying to, on the left-hand side, this is where we try to control all our threats. We try to avoid losing the control. And in case we lose control, we try to regain it or to reduce the final impact. And we had this also within Shell Aircraft for many, many years. They were pinned to the wall. They were reviewed by the safety manager each year. However, that's where it stayed. We linked all the manuals that we had to that, but there was not an active management of those bow ties. So the question is, how can you link your risk management and your assurance product to make sure that you're going to deliver and make sure that the system improves? So for that, we introduced the concept of threatline auditing. What I just showed you was the threat lines. And the threat line is a single line leading up to the top event. And in the end, it is of course interesting to see how effective a single barrier is. However, what you are trying to achieve as an operator is to prevent this threat from reaching the top event. So they need to work together, and you need to understand if they have single weaknesses, if they're all owned by the same owner, or that they're relying on the same type of process or procedure. Because at one moment, if that single fact is applicable, then that whole threat line is exposed. So we want to understand how well is our safety management system protecting us from the threat reaching the top event. And that's basically the whole concept of threatline auditing. And in addition, we have some great added value. So we now take the bow ties to the shop floor. We're going to sit down with engineers. We're going to sit down with line pilots and ask them, just tell me, do you understand the threat? And do we understand how the threat could release the hazard? And if the answer is yes, that's perfect, because then we can move on and we can ask pilots or engineers, so tell me, how do we prevent that from happening? And in the beginning, we had pilots who know our flight operations manual by heart, and they start chatting about, okay, this is defined here and here and here. But what was more important were the discussion afterwards. So we say, so how effective is this? And how does it apply to us? And will it actually manage the hazard from reaching the top event? And we got great discussions out of that, because it was not there to check the homework, how well they know the manual. It was there to understand, to see how they were applying this, and to have their view if they felt it was effective, yes or no. So the people on the front line are now much more aware of the why, how, what of the barrier, and also the barriers that they own. And a great example is that when you go down to the hangar floor or something like that, and you ask in a specific bow tie. So, dear engineer, do you know which barriers you own? And they can perfectly pick them out, which barriers they own, and how they are managing that specific barrier. They also now more critical on identifying weakness in these independent barriers, because they also see, if I'm the owner, I better make sure it's a strong one. And we try to see how barriers work together, because in many threat lines, it doesn't only stop with the pilots, it's the whole organization is involved. You have the line pilots, but you also have the training manager has a role to play in there, or it's a quality safety manager that has to play a part in that specific threat line. And all together, we will see how this whole SMS works in conjunction with all the departments. So you step out the auditing part from only looking at one department, one process, to basically opening it up for the whole operation. And this is actually a live example of what this threatline audit looks like. So we lift out one specific threatline. We want to focus on a specific threatline, and this one was linked to the loss of situational awareness. And the first question was: do we understand if the flight crew do not correctly manage the expected lateral vertical path, that it could end up in CFIT? I think the easy answer is yes. I think we all understand that. However, we need to keep on flying, so it is a significant hazard for us. And then we go into the direct barriers, and also have a look into the different escalation factors to truly understand what is happening in here. There are some learnings from that I won't go through in detail. It's just there as an overview for you to see how this effectively works. So now we have done this specific threatline audit, and I ended up on my desk with all those findings, and I now understand a better perception of how this exposure works in our operation. However, it was very difficult to brief it out to higher management or even to the line management. And for that, we have developed a system called the BOTA Live. So we are now able to link our finding database, which we use Qpulse. It's a system it's a database where we link, track all of our findings, and we have now tried to link that to the bow ties. So it is not the importance of this one is to see where we have exposure on the threat lines, because that's where we want to take action. And that threat line can change daily, basically on the amount of audits that we do or findings that we have in place. So it's important to have this as an active management. So instead of just briefing out to management, well, you've got, I don't know, 10 findings overdue or you're due, it's far more important to have an informed discussion about what is the exposure to our operation and what do we need to fix to make sure that we are as low as reasonably practicable. And in short, that is basically threatline auditing. So it appears to be a very difficult name, but in fact, it's not that complex. It's taking our bow ties to the shop floor and taking it into our assurance product. Let me stop here for questions, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you very much to both of you for your presentations. I see that we have a couple of questions here in the Q&A, so let me have a look. I'm actually looking at the last question that came in here, and I think that Mark already touched a bit on that. Did you encounter issues with staff buy-in of this concept? I think you already spoke about that, but do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think the difficult part of it is it's quite time consuming. So you really need to take the time away from pilots and engineers to really sit down and understand how you do that. And the other aspect that we have found is that for engineers, it's quite easy. You can discuss the threat line, you can go down and you can check how the work is actually done. For pilots, it's a bit more tricky. So we're now trying with our training manager to understand, to find a way. So how do we make sure we can link it into our competence-based training or to our simulator training to make sure that actually what we are saying on the chart is actually working on the barriers instead of only discussing them. So there's still work in progress, but the buy-in is actually quite great, because you step away from this classical part where you are as a teacher trying to look at the homework of people. And I didn't like that position, to be very honest. So I'm happy to move into this direction.
Sounds great. I see there's also a question for Hervé here. At the beginning, you admitted that you and your colleagues were not very familiar with the concept, but we hope, or we believe that after this presentation, more of our members and more of the business aviation industry will start looking into the threatline auditing concept. Do you feel like right now you and your team would have a better understanding and a better capacity to support the industry?
Yeah, well, at the end, what you can notice is that it's a semantic issue initially, because we've never heard about threatline auditing. So the concept itself is not new, because as you can see with my presentation, it's addressed in a different way in our regulation, which describe basically the objective of such activities. So whether you call it threatline auditing, or as we have in our regulation, safety audit, safety survey, I think what is important is the outcome. So you can, I mean, our regulation is quite open. So the methodology presented by Mark is based on the Bowtie tool, which we don't mandate. Basically, we don't recommend any specific tool for the conduct of the safety risk management. So it's open. It's up to each operator to determine. So I mean, we are ready to support on this, but we consider at the same time that everything is already embedded in our regulation, and there's no new concept in principle, except that it's done in a certain way with certain tools. But in principle, it's not completely new, and it's already addressed in the regulation.
Yeah, that's actually a great message. So for those of us listening, it's just taxonomy, but the ASA is there and is ready to support us. I see that Robert has a couple of questions. I will move quickly back to Mark. Looking at the options, there are all the options that you had there in the Bowtie. There is a huge number of permutations possible. Can you address all of these with the system, or is it more to create an order and then look to fix the largest issues?
Yeah, I think we took a risk-based approach on that as well. And basically what we have also said is that you can look into the threat line, which is the active threat, operational threat that you have. But there are some big systems underlying to support that if you come to competence and training, or you come to document control, to quality and safety. So instead of reviewing that with each of the escalation barrier that you will find in there, you better use those type of process audits back in to make sure those are actually functioning underneath. So the risk, this threatline auditing is really based on the direct operational risk. What do we face on the hangar floor? What do we face in the cockpit or in the cabin? To make sure what we need to have, what's actually the risk. Other bigger stuff, processes that run underneath. Probably a process audit is the way to go still. But yeah, so looking for feedback on that if there's any other way to do it.
Thank you for that answer. And now another question for Hervé. Also from Robert, is each individual FBO defined as a contractor, even if you fly there only once?
Well, we don't have, indeed, in Orogen 205, a clear, let's say, definition of and clear scope of which contracted activity should be included in the scope of this process. But I think it's quite obvious the intention as well was to include any activity, any contracted activity, which has an impact, potential impact on the safety of the operations of the operator. So indeed, such organization provided services at one airport might, I mean, a failure or a problem at their level might have an impact on the operations of the operator, and they need to be considered within the hazard identification and safety risk management process of the operator.
Thank you. I see that Frederick wanted to type another question for Hervé. Frederick, if you can, in the meantime, type again the question, because it was only typed at Hervé, but there's no question here. So if you can quickly type it while I go back to Mark with another question. From what I can see, your organization has done quite a lot of work on this topic in the past years. Where would you advise a small operator to start with improving their internal audit processes, where to focus their resources?
Well, it depends where you sit in your safety management journey. So in order to make this happen, you need to have the compliance underneath and have that covered. If it's really about the risk management, and if you look at the bow ties, we started out with the UK Significant 7, which are just available with the UK CA. and it gives a great start if you want to apply that to your type of operation. Of course, you need to customize it. You need to link that all, but it gives you a great start to look at your risk management. Hope that helps. But in the end, it's all about the maturity, I would say, the SMS, and how do you improve that. So it depends a little bit on where you sit with that operation.
Thank you very much for that answer. I see that there's another. Okay, Frederick typed his question, and I think it is for Hervé. Does it mean that contracted base maintenance providers with SMS and compliance system don't need to be audited by the operator?
Yeah, mute. So it's a good question, and it's very often a debate we have whether you need to audit all your contractors. So in principle, if you have a look at the regulation, it's not stated anywhere that you have to audit all of them. I mean, it's clear. They have to be included in your compliance monitoring program, and of course, to check that they are complying with the regulation, and you have to consider the hazards stemming from their activities. But nothing states that, of course, that you need to audit them, all of them, basically. In practice, I think for most of them, it makes sense to audit them, because with the remote tools, it's very difficult to assess compliance of those operators, of those contractors, and especially when they are not certified one. If it's another operator holding an AOC, which is contracting activities, performing activities on your behalf, of course, you may rely on the AOC of such operator. But when it's a company having not subject to any certification requirements, of course, your level of monitoring should be higher, and in this case, it might make sense to audit them.
Okay, thank you very much. And Frederick, I hope you got your answer to your question. I see that there are no other questions in the Q&A. We still have a couple of minutes to go until the end of the meeting. So if anybody still has questions to type, we are happy to welcome them. In the meantime, would any of you like to add anything based on the questions that you receive, or that anything that you would like to, like some final words or something? Okay. I see that there are no additional questions, so I guess that we will thank all of you for joining, and thanks very much to Mark and Hervé for sharing their insights with us today. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if after the presentation you realized that you had the question but you didn't think about it during the session, just send it to safety@EBAA, and we will reach out to Hervé and Mark and get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. Well, then I guess thank you very much, and we will have another session at 3:30 on operational excellence in ground operations. We are looking forward to seeing all of you online after 3:30. And thanks once again for joining the session. Thanks once again to Mark and Hervé, and see you at 3:30 then.
Hello.
Hello, Martina. Hello, Terry. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I got you. Thanks, Karina.
Okay, sure, no worries.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Martina. Can you hear
Okay,
me? Great.
excellent.
Okay, awesome.
Hello, Corina.
Hello, Jose. Great, we managed.
Now today with this, I changed the headphones. Maybe these ones are better than the yesterday ones.
They are definitely perfect. Yeah, I can hear you really well. And
Perfect.
also, good afternoon, Adina.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Super. Thanks.
So how is everybody? All good and ready?
Yeah, ready.
Oh, good.
So just, I think the plan, Adina, just so that you're ready for it, is that once we've done the introductions and started the session, we'll come straight over to you to go through your slides, if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
And I'm sorry if I asked this before and if we talked about it. I'm a bit tired. Adina, will you share your screen, or do you want me to give you control of my screen and you advance through the slides? What do you prefer?
I don't mind even if you do the leading, and I will only indicate when to change
sure,
the screens.
we can also do it like that. Sure, of course. But I can also give you control of my screen, so you can advance this.
Okay,
slides
fine,
are on my screen, but you advance them whenever you need them.
Yeah, fine, super, thanks. I'm not used to the Zoom tool, so I apologize in advance if anything goes wrong.
No problem.
Right,
I
my
can
video.
take control at any point if you prefer that. It's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay, Corina, I have a couple of slides to talk about. Well, it's just a comparison about the ground operations procedures from the point of view of the air operator and the point of view of the ground handling. Maybe it will be helpful to show.
I will make
it's short. It's very short. It takes less than 10 minutes.
No problem. I'll make a co-host, so then you also have the option of sharing your screen directly.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. Just for the information, because also somebody wrote in the chat, the attendees which are still online can hear us right now, but I don't think that we're discussing anything very contentious, so I think it's okay if they hear us. So then I have a quick question to Martina, because she also prepared a couple of slides. Since both Adina and Jose will have a couple of slides, should I also have your slides ready and you go through them as well, or do you still want to keep them as a backup?
I would still prefer to keep them as a backup, because they are now not slides per se that I would say I would go through the slides and talk about them, but it's only a couple of pages. Maybe if you see if the topic would be applicable, feel free to pull up any slides you want at any time.
Okay, great, thanks. We have 2 minutes to go. And just so you know, I think Justine, are you around here? quick question.
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Do we still have the 2 minutes of music?
No, I don't think so.
Good.
You can,
No,
you can start.
it's good. It's good for me to know.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. A minute to go. I think I will mute everybody until we start the session, and then you will also have the option of unmuting yourselves when we start the session per se.
Corina, just a second. Can you hear me because I changed the connection? It's okay?
Yes, it's okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Good afternoon once again. For those of you who are just joining now, my name is Corina Stubey. I am the Safety and Advanced Air Mobility Manager at EBAA, and I have the pleasure of being your host today. We are starting our second session for this afternoon and the fourth session of the Virtual Safety Summit. We want to thank once again our three committed sponsors, Bombardier, Dassault Aviation, and Gulfstream Aerospace, for their continuous support of our events, even in these challenging times. This is already the second year in a row that we had to have this event in an online format, but nevertheless, they are supporting us. So we want to thank them once again for that. And again, for those who are just joining us now, quickly a bit of housekeeping. Your microphones and cameras will be switched off throughout the session. If you want to interact between each other, we have a chat function. If you want to ask questions to our speakers, there is a Q&A tool that we strongly encourage you to use. The meeting will be recorded, audio and video. We will make the recordings available in a couple of days after today. And if you have any questions that we do not get to answer in the allocated time, or if you think about a question after this meeting, please send us an email at ebaa.org, and we will try to get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists for today. We will discuss operational excellence in ground operations. We are joined by Terry Yeomans, the program director for EBAA at IBAC. I'm sure that all of you know EBAA, the International Standard for Business Aviation Handlers. And our panelists for today are Martina Bartolik, Quality and Safety Manager and responsible for EBAA at Jet Aviation, Adina Shoni, Ground Handling Expert at EASA, and Jose Rubino, Safety and Compliance Manager at United Aviation Services. And now I would like to give the floor to our moderator, Terry, to kick off the session for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Martina, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you may be in the world. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about operational excellence in ground operations, and I think that following the session that we had earlier on in terms of the auditing side of things and the oversight aspects, what we want to start off with is, you've probably all heard about the impending regulation of ground handlers that is coming from EASA. So I'd like to hand over to Adina, please, just to run through what your expectations are going to be and where we are to date with the EASA work, please, Adina, so for the audience. So thank you. And you're on mute, Adina.
Hello again, sorry. Adina Soni, I am here on behalf of EASA. Thank you for inviting me here. The purpose of me being here is to show you what we are doing at the moment and to give you a few words about where we are coming from. So this is in a nutshell about what's coming our way in the next few years. It's about a new domain that is going to be regulated under one sign, let's say, under the European Commission, European Union sign. This is going on under a current rulemaking task. This is what we call the rulemaking process in EASA. It has a number. I will get to it a bit later if needed. But for right now, for you to understand where we are and where we are coming from, am I to move the slides, or Corina, will you help me with that?
You can move the slides.
I can move the slides. Thank you. I need to see how. Okay. Right. So I think that by now everybody has heard of what we generally call the basic regulation. That's the regulation that gives us the right to exist, to us EASA, and the regulation of a new domain, ground handling, that's also part of the current basic regulation. The number is 2018/1139. And this is just a quick reminder of what the basic regulation is now requiring for the future ground handling regulation to contain. So it says that the ground handling service provider, as being responsible for the safe operation of its activities, has to ensure that they have the right facilities, the right personnel, the right equipment, that they have the right procedures at the aerodrome where they operate, and they comply with the procedures of the aerodrome where they operate, and that they provide ground services in accordance with the procedures and instructions of the aircraft operator. And this is all included in what we call Annex 7. That's the essential requirements. And point 4 is only about ground handling service providers. In a few more details until the page changes. The basic regulation, the essential requirements, are now specifically mentioning that the ground handling service providers will have to have a management system to manage the risks and to aim for the continuous improvement of the system, that this management system has to be in line, coordinated with that of the aerodrome operator, and that the management system will also have to include a part to cover the occurrence reporting. And the regulation, and the currently existing regulation on occurrence reporting, also includes ground handling as well. And it also establishes the ground for sharing safety information with the aerodrome operator and the aircraft operator, and if necessary and relevant for the to the air traffic service provider. Another important aspect is that the ground handling service provider will have now to ensure that all the ground handling personnel that they use are properly trained. So they have to be trained and qualified, and that this training has to be ensured on a continuous basis. So the ground handling service provider will have to ensure continued competence of its personnel. Apart from the ground handling training for the personnel and the management system, There will also have to be, so the requirements will also have to include for the ground handling service provider the existence of manuals and procedures. Also to include the procedures and the maintenance program for its ground support equipment. And of course, the provider will have to have a ground handling manual with all the necessary instructions, information, and procedures. So having in mind that now the basic regulation clearly specifies what the future ground handling regulation will have to include, EASA has been working with a very good group of experts since we started working on this task, on these regulatory tasks for 2 years, more than 2 years now. So part of the future regulation will include or will be dedicated to the management system of ground handling service providers. So we have thought, after some sessions of brainstorming, we have thought that probably the best idea would be to have a station-centric approach. And in a few words, what this station-centric approach means, it means that the structure of the regulation and the implementation of the requirements will have to start from simple to complex. Now, today, everybody is used to thinking in very grand terms, in complex structures and huge structures and infrastructures, but maybe the more complicated thing is to think in simpler terms, to make things simple, to be able to be applied also by smaller organizations, which we know exist today. So a simple management system that is easy to implement, that is easy to check, to verify its effectiveness. A simple management system can be much more easily adapted to the reality, to the context of the aerodrome where the service is provided, to the context that includes also the aircraft operator and the surrounding environment. So what does this mean? In essence, it means that the SMS elements of its management system will be adapted to reflect the specificity of every station. So what it also means is that, according again to the basic regulation, let's not forget, this being a declaration system, it means that every ground handling service provider providing services at an aerodrome under the basic regulation will have to submit a declaration. And I will say a few more words about the declaration system later on. So every station, meaning that the ground handling service provider will have to submit a declaration for every station where they provide services. Then again, the simple structure and the station-centric of the management system will also mean that the ground handling service provider will have the full flexibility on how they wish to approach any potential findings or any problems, either locally and as if they were acting as an individual, like it also happens in reality on many occasions, many times, like an individual station, or it can decide that the finding can be addressed centrally if there is, for example, a business model that acts with a headquarter that dictates to all the other stations what to do and what to change in order to address a finding. It also means, with a station-centric approach, that the safety relevant information, particular for that station, can be easily distributed around and shared with the other actors involved in the act of ground handling services, that's the aerodrome operator and the aircraft operator. So sharing information increases trust and increases also the ability to strive together for a common aim of having safe operations. And of course, if the aircraft operator is also providing ground handling services to itself, the future rules will be drafted in such a way as to avoid any duplications, because the aircraft operator already has a management system in place, so it wouldn't have to duplicate what it already has, but only to incorporate the new elements of the management system for ground handling or the SMS for ground handling activities into its current management system. And this is the station-centric approach. And if we move forward to the next page, a declaration regime, what does it mean? The basic regulation says something like that. The ground handling service provider will operate under a regulatory regime. This means that there's going to be a form in the future ground handling regulation. That form will have to be filled in with the general information about the ground handling service provider and the activities that they provide at a station. The ground handling service provider submits this form to the competent authority, and this is just, it should be understood as a means of informing the competent authority of its existence. And as soon as this form has been submitted, with a margin of a few days of information transmission, acknowledgement of receipt, the ground handling service provider may already start providing services without having to wait for any approval or acceptance by the competent authority. This, of course, also presupposes that the arrangements with the aerodrome operator are already in place. And if necessary, because some aerodromes do require this, also the authority that is required in basis of a European directive, that's the EC Directive 9667, but not in all cases. And with this declaration, once submitted, the ground handling service provider can already start providing services, and the competent authority acknowledges the receipt. So it is informed that the ground handling service provider, this new one or existing one, now operates at a certain aerodrome, and the competent authority will have to include in its oversight program to plan, let's say, the future audits or inspections for the ground handling service provider. So in general, this declaration regime should be considered and is to be taken as a lighter process, as a lighter way of operating than the certification process. And it was intentionally done so, and this was a choice at the political level, and it is so included in the basic regulation. What does it mean also is the fact that the main responsibility and the first responsibility for the compliance with the applicable requirements falls with the ground handling service provider and not with the competent authority. The competent authority check comes later. And this is a similar system with the one that currently exists for the non-commercial operations, NCC today, regulated under 965. And also with the new regulation for the apron management services, which is included in the aerodrome regulation. All these three, say, entities are or will be regulated under a declaration regime. So in terms of oversight, how the oversight would take place within this concept of station-centric approach, this means that every ground handling service provider should receive only one inspection at a time, because we also discussed in a group of experts that this could become a burden if a ground handling service provider receives dozens of inspections and audits from many competent authorities, because the ground handling service provider may operate multinationally, it may have hundreds of stations. So with the station-centric approach, it means that every station operating as a single unit will receive one oversight inspection at a time. So this also means that for the competent authority, they will have to decide, depending on how the organization is providing services, the competent authority will decide how to approach the solving of the findings and the monitoring of the findings and the corrective actions. Because if the ground handling service provider is providing only national services, only on aerodromes within a single member state, then the competent authority is will find it much easier to solve the issues with the ground handling service provider. And in case that there is a multinational organization providing services on many aerodromes, this is where the concept of, or you already know, the concept of cooperative oversight will come into place, and competent authorities from several member states where the ground handling service provider provide services will have to cooperate in order to ensure that the findings, in case it is proven it's a finding that transcends the specificity of the station, and it's a finding related to the management system, which, let's say, we call it a systemic finding, is evenly addressed on all the stations where the ground handling service provider operates, so not just on one station, not in just one member state, but on all stations in all member states evenly. So this is in a nutshell the summary of the concepts that we have discussed, and we are looking forward to receiving your comments when the draft rules are going to be put in place and published for discussion next year in quarter 2 2022. Still in draft, because we plan for the publication of the opinion in first quarter 2023. That being said, I think this is my last slide. And this is the email address that you can use to send us queries, questions, comments. And thank you very much. And back to you, Terry.
Hey, thanks, Adina. So we heard that the focus is going to be on the management system. We also focused on the safety element. So safety core management systems, that's why we have on the panel Martina and Jose. They both have active management systems that they have been doing now for a number of years. And what I really want to do is that we've all gone through a huge management of change event over the last 18 months. The pandemic, COVID, has hit everybody. And that is a management of change event. So how has having a management system benefited the two of you with your daily operations? And what challenges have you seen with this quality versus safety aspect between the two? And I know you've got some specifics, Jose in particular, that you want to talk about. But if I can start with Martina. Martina, over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Martina Bartolic from Jet Aviation. I'm Quality and Safety Manager covering EMEA. I'm also involved in Jet Aviation Global Emergency Response Plan. So we're not just operating locally, we have a wide network. So we operate from US, EMEA, Asia Pacific. And in the past 18 months, I think it goes without saying that the times were extremely challenging. So we went through a lockdown phase with basically no movement. Then from one day to another, the movement increased. And what I can say, what we have observed, that if we would not have a functioning, a very strong safety management system, it would be much harder. And we went through many challenges that actually, through these pandemics, that they encouraged us to find new solutions, to look into new technologies, from going from all the classroom trainings, switching to online trainings. And throughout the safety management system that we have, we were actually able to, at a very early stage, started drafting the guidelines. We, at a very early stage, talking about January 2020, we already had first risk assessment done. We already had a group of experts from worldwide working on global guidelines and working on further risk assessments. So honestly to say, I cannot imagine going through this situation, which we are still facing. It's just challenges are different. Without the functioning safety management system, I'm not sure that we would be able to not only perform risk assessment, not only do the remote trainings, but also document everything. Because by document it really in details, all the phases will also help us. Hopefully, once we enter into the post-pandemic phase, it will help us to just look back, to maybe go through a very clear timeline to see, okay, what we could learn from it, what we could do better, and how we can, above all, prepare ourselves for any other kind of situation, not talking about another pandemics, but you never know what tomorrow might bring.
Hey, thanks, Martina. And Jose, if you could explain how your process worked, because you had a little bit of a different view to it, because you not only maintained some traffic, but you actually adopted additional traffic, again, which was another management of change event in terms of the medevac flights.
Yeah, well, in fact, hello, everybody. I'm Jose Rubinho from United Aviation in Spain. In fact, well, in a structure of in our company that we cover among 14, 17 airports in all Spain, we have always managed medical evacuations, but we experienced a high increase of flights during the pandemic, and that almost balanced the lack of flights, of business flights that we were used to do. But anyway, sometimes we experience that maybe with the lack of support of the authorities, that is one of the major things that we have this during this pandemic. And the chaos promoted by the continuous change of regulations, not only in Europe, but also in Spain. Almost every week we see closing of an airport, closing of a country. Then we have to experience how to deal with the new regulations to take the temperature of the people. In fact, was a huge challenge for us, and I cannot imagine how can we deal with it without a safety management system in place, because the safety management system for us has been a key tool to manage all these changes that suddenly came in less than one week or one month. And but yes, let's say with the medical evacuation flights, we took a little bit. We were used to do so, but we have never experienced so much, so many flights like this one.
So in terms of the challenges, how do you manage to maintain that quality and safety balance going through so many changes between, and that question's to both of you, how do you maintain that balance between providing a good quality service with less staff, because you have maybe some on furlough, some that are isolating because they may have been in contact with somebody? How do you manage that quality and safety balance? Is it a challenge?
Maybe I continue. Yes, the way to approach to these changes has been always in contact with our staff in any of the airports that we have in our organization, but as, of course, to have continuous training sometimes improvise it, because the lack of information gives a little bit of anxiety to the people who are in the first line working. And of course, what we have experienced is that normally we say safety first, but in this case, health was the first thing. Then the continuity of the business was the second thing, and the third thing was the safety. But we never stopped to have audits. We never stopped to have incident reporting systems, because it was something that it was connected to the main purpose of the safety management system. If we have an issue, and the biggest issue that we had was the pandemic, it helped a lot to learn how to deal with the safety management system. You have to think about that we started with it.
Sorry, Jose, you've hit your mute button.
Sorry, we started in 2019 and with our safety management system, and we had just starting to work with our audits and incident reporting system, and then stopped everything. So we do some deviation from the lack of audits and lack of operational issues, and we pass it through to the health issues, to the change of regulations issues, that they were also an issue for everybody of us.
And Martina, same to you.
Yeah,
how did you deal with it?
Thank you, Terry. So I have a very straight answer to the question how we managed to get through the hard times, just with the incredible dedication of our frontline personnel, because they were really the one in the front line through this. Especially at the beginning, we were all facing lack of supplies. There were lack of masks, lack of gloves, lack of disinfections all around the globe. And how we managed to overcome these hard times is with the help of our staff. And coming also from the operations, not only from quality and safety, we can only imagine how challenging it was from the first line, for the frontline personnel. The biggest challenges for us, as Jose mentioned, that they did not stop the audits, neither did we, talking on a global scale in 2020. Last year, we went through a huge certification audit, and I said it then and I say it again. In exactly times like this, when sometimes we have a feeling that safety is somehow overrun by just by day-to-day operation, just answering emails, answering phones, and that is exactly the moment when we have to focus on safety, when we have to put safety to the front. And this is hard for the frontline personnel to handle on their own, and this is where the management comes. This is where the involvement of not only safety management but also local management plays a very big role. So just being aligned in the safety management system, we could help each other. So one station was facing some issues and we were stuck, and we had the advantage of being so international and being so linked. This was a big advantage, and also having a functioning safety management system that we were building up since 2016, and not being in the phase of building something when this situation already was set in motion. This was also a huge help to us.
And I think one of the things that was interesting, what Adina was saying with the regulation and the way that the framework is being brought up, they're talking about a simple management system. And I know that we practice, or we preach that here at IBAC with the keep it simple process. But having, how important is it to have the ability to set your system up and be able to put in there the deviations that you need to be flexible in times of these sort of changes, and not making it so rigid that when it comes to these management of change events, that you really are stuck with changing it. So having that flexibility within your own management system.
That actually, when Adina mentioned during her presentation that the safety management system should be simple, this was actually one of the biggest challenges for us, just simply setting 8 safety performance indicators, because you can imagine having an international network that our safety management system roughly contains of more or less 800 pages, and I'm not talking about the local manuals, checklists, SOPs. So that for us was one of the biggest challenges from going from this complex safety management system, because one authority was doing one check, the other authority was doing another check. So what happened, we were just adding to our SMS system and just building it up. But once you have to shell out that simple core, that was the biggest challenge, because there are regulations, and of course we understand that regulations, audits, they need to be performed. We are audited by the authorities. We have operational licenses, and on one hand we had all the requirements and really just expanding our system, just adding to it. On the other hand, we have to keep it simple, because if you make it too complex, the frontline personnel that is actually using the safety management system will lose themselves. They will not know anymore, because we came to the phase where we were releasing read and sign documents, when we were releasing memos 2-3 times a week. And it was not possible anymore for the frontline personnel to follow this. So on one hand, they were drowning in work. So we had reduced staff and increasing volume of traffic. And on the other hand, there were all these regulations coming in at the same time. And of course, we're not saying that we're not agreeing with the regulations, but I think in times like this, as safety is the first #1 priority, so should be the possibility of having a certain deviation or extension, so to say.
And Jose, from your side?
Well, from our side, what we have experienced about how to adapt to this has been a little bit, well, there were two different scenarios, because the first scenario was 2020, where it was totally lack of flights. That means lack of staff, because we have to reduce to cut costs directly and to reduce the staff. So it was lack of audits, lack of issues, so lack of incident reporting system, and then it was less control of everything that was happening. And then came 2021, the best year ever in the history of the business aviation, and that means that we have 100% of all the staff of 2019, but 50% or 70% in some airports, with more activity than ever. So that means lack of staff, so lack of audits, lack of because everything was focused on the activity, on the operations. So that means at the end is the same, lack of control. How you control that? Well, being flexible, as Martina said, is mandatory that the system has to be simple, but are also flexible. So not too much. It has to be not too very rough. If you have to do 1 audit 1 month or 2 audits per month, it doesn't matter if you do 3 audits in 1 year. The important thing is that the thing you put in the audits, the thing that you put in the issues are important, are relevant. And with this information, all the companies, all the structures will develop a system to take decisions easily and more seriously. Because otherwise, we focused, for example, in 2020, not to implement too many, because the first thing that you said, okay, let's see how is the training, because everybody's stopping house, so we can take control of the training. But it's not too many fair when somebody doesn't know if it will be the loss of a job, to say no, but prepare for if you are going to come here, but to come again to the job. So what we focus at is, okay, the people we have in the front line has to be, they need fresh regulations, that they need clear statements. So we started to implement all the health and recommendations, and how can we maintain the GSA components just to rely 3 months or 4 months stopped. And we started with these simple things that were not directly involved with operations, but they were involved with safety. So it was something about creativity to find a way for the people to understand that the SMS, the safety management system, was still alive, but not only focused in the activity, it was also in the background of the activity, maintenance, relations, and training. But was hard, was bad.
Okay. And in terms of outsourced services and your supply chain, did you see any issues with that? Did you see, unfortunately, some of your outsourced services that couldn't make it through the pandemic, so you've had to resource from elsewhere? Martina, did that affect any of your stations?
Yes, we have definitely seen that, especially on the supplier side, small suppliers, of course, 2020, with a very slow traffic, there were, of course, changes. But we never had severe supply issues that we would, for instance, have a major safety-related incident. So the issues were more on the quality side, not so much on the safety side. But what we also have encountered were difficulties of auditing the suppliers. So we had many suppliers globally that simply refused the audits, and they were like, we don't accept it. And said, may we at least send you the questionnaire? And they said, no. Where does it say that we have to do it? So, of course, with some persuasions, we were more or less successful, but we had some of the suppliers in the supply chain that simply refused the audits, any kind of audit, either a desktop audit, or, I mean, we were not performing any on-site audits. And again, this is changing as we speak. We just started slowly to reconnect with the suppliers face to face. We're switching again to in the light of the recent situation, to the remote audits. So this is one of the challenges for us as well. Again, we have on one side the regulations that we need to fulfill, but in the supply chain, we also kind of rely, or we depend on the suppliers that would accept the supplier audits.
Thanks, Martina. And so let's switch it around now. You are part of the supply chain. Both of you are supplying services to the aircraft operators. And I know we've discussed this in previous discussions, Jose, but let's talk about pricing. Let's talk about the pricing squeeze from operators. Because, of course, operators have been hit just as much as everybody has with financially. When you're asked to provide a service at a cheaper cost to help the operator, is that of benefit to anybody other than the operator? How do you work with that when there's pricing pressures on you to deliver a service with the same levels of safety, the same levels of management system oversight that are compliant with the requirements that are coming out? How challenging is that for you as a provider of services?
Maybe you are thinking about me, as I'm also sales manager of the company, so I can speak you more clearly about that. It's something that we have been talking about several times about this, but in these times that everybody's talking about safety and safety first, and of course it's very important, sometimes we find a lack of interest in the operators about safety in the last time, in the last decision, okay, in the last word. because obviously at the end the economical factor, the money factor, is always 90% of the part of the decision that they choose among one operator or other. But sometimes that's one of the things that I would like to speak. Maybe I have a short presentation for you to show. Maybe to show the air operators how is our business, how we are doing, how is the background of our business, and maybe they will understand that our cost, because we know that the cost for an air operator is huge, but the cost to maintain not only the safety management systems, but everything online and everything prepare and everything maintain, and with all the records and everything with the check, all the checks that we have, the operator has to choose among an operator that has everything checked in a paper, or if they want it in a real life. If you want in a real life, that the cost is very high. It's very high to maintain this, and sometimes it doesn't match with the price that you get from the operator.
So if you can set up your slides, Jose, and what I'll do is I'll go back to the previous session that we had just before we started. And I don't know whether the two of you heard it, but the previous session was all about internal auditing and looking at the reaction with making sure that the outsourced services that you are buying in as an aircraft operator are compliant. But there is a cost to that compliancy, and I think that will lead into your presentation, Jose. So please go ahead and get that up.
Will.
And while we're on there, we've got a question that came up on the questions, just for you to think about while Jose is talking about this. So think about reports of tiredness and fatigue in your teams. From going from furlough to now being back to normal operations, and in some cases exceeding previous operations. So have a think about that, and go ahead, Jose, with your slides.
Okay, it's very simple. It's only to show. It will be very, very simple. It's not a very technical thing. It's only to explain how I hope that Martina shared this with me. She doesn't know yet what will be there, but it was something that to show how is the first thing that I would like to put is the air operator's perception comparing with the ground handler reality. Okay, so the air operator's perception is that first they get a quotation or agreement from the company, and then they send us a ground handling request. Then they arrive with the passengers and bags, and we attend them. We serve them with beautiful vans. Then they refuel, and the fuel is very expensive always. Then they depart with the bags, with the passengers and bags with the same beautiful van, and they go. And that's the simple thing. And that's, I suppose, why all the operators want to reduce the cost every year, because one of the things is some companies that I've seen, they haven't increased the price of the handling since 10 years. Now they are reducing. And in 10 years, we have become now with safety management system, with new trainings, with new regulations that are tough and tougher and tougher. And everybody, all the ground operations operators, they have the ground handlers, they have to assume more costs. So what's the ground handler reality? Well, the first of all is you have to get a ground handling license. To get the ground handling license, you need aviation liability insurance. That is also very expensive for us. Then we have to recruit the staff and to do the training. And of course, it's a full training, and to maintain the records of this training, dangerous goods, aviation security, safety, human factor, etc., etc. Then it comes the part of the regulations, the constant changing of the international and national regulations. in a standard way. We will not speak about the coronavirus pandemic yet. Then we have to purchase ground service equipment that is very, very expensive. Not as expensive as an aircraft, but it's expensive. It has a good cost. Then we have to maintain it and to maintain records of this maintenance. And then they expect the FBO facilities with very good crew lounges and passenger lounges. And then there comes the agreement or a quotation. So we have been working in the background a lot before a client, before an air operator comes to us to get the quotation and agreement. But then when they do the ground handling request, we have to ask for a slot and parking request to the airport. Sometimes I don't know how it managed, because I know that this maybe is different in some parts of Europe, but in Spain, the airport is national. So the airport authorities are the ones that own the tarmac and the parking and the slots. So we are not physically the owners of the tarmac, so we don't decide when the slot is available or not. This comes from the airport authorities. And sometimes in some parts of the season, most of them in the summer season, it's very difficult to get a slot anywhere. Then you arrive with passengers and bags, but we have to put the chocks, the cones, the pushback, all to follow all the procedures, 2 meters, 2 meters, to step brakes, everything that maintains everything on safe to your aircraft. Then the refueling is very expensive, but in some countries such as Spain, the fueling business is not the FBO's business. It's a business done by the airport authorities, and we cannot manage this. We don't have any benefit of it. Okay. And then the departure, and they go, but afterwards we have to manage with the payment of the airport charges, the counting of the flights on credit, etc., etc. What happens with this? Okay, we have frequent internal and external audits of the first part. Let's say the part of the aviation liability insurance, the ground handling license is when the operators are coming, or you from IBAC are coming to check or requirements or licenses. And then the second part are to perform internal audits and to have an incident reporting system in place. That is the major thing is inside of the operation. These 2 parts, these are the 2 legs of an SMS, okay? But as you can see, the perception that you have is very, very reduced compared with the reality that we have, okay? We have the safety management system in place, but what happens? This is in a normal situation, but what happens when there come COVID restrictions? That in 2020, as I said, we have fewer flights than ever, lack of staff. That means less audits, less reports, less control. In 2021, the opposite, with more flights than ever, lack of staff comparing with the huge amount of flights that we have, less audits, less reports, less control. So at the end, what the SMS help us is to have clear procedures, to have more responsiveness, to take the right decisions, and to take more control of our business. But this is also related to the cost, as you said, Terry. Sometimes the perception that I think it is involved with the perception of some operators, that they are not aware what means to have a business, so a ground handling business in place, following all the procedures and with all the first certificates and all the good performances that they expect from us.
Thanks, Jose. Anything to add there, Martina? You agree with that?
Thank you, Terry. It would be hard for me to add something because we're facing so many different situations throughout the network, and Jose made a couple of very good points, but for me to go into the specific would be really hard at this point.
Okay, thank you. So I think the thing really we want to try and get across is that in order for an aircraft operator to ensure that their outsourced services are compliant, there is a cost involved in that. There's a cost that you have to invest in as ground handling service providers to maintain that compliance with the regulatory requirements. And although the regulatory requirements are pending and they're coming from EASA, there are already costs that you incur that are not insignificant costs. They are major costs to your overheads. So, you know, compliance does come at a cost all the way down the chain. It's not just the operators that have that additional cost, it's you as the supply chain, just as it is the catering companies you use, the transport companies you use, that are all there to support the aircraft operators that you service. So this is a huge supply chain issue where increased compliance, increased mandatory requirements do come at a cost. So let's not squeeze. Otherwise, you're going to end up with less service providers out there, and that's not the intent. So about this fatigue question, thank you for that, Jose. I think that really does give a good overview. So fatigue and tiredness. Now, we're certainly hearing reports here at IBAC from people that we know from the EBAA world and pilots that have actually worked in implementing some of the standards that we have, that they are starting to see fatigue, shortcuts being taken because of tiredness out there. Are you seeing any of that in the real world? Are you starting to see reports of fatigue or fatigue related issues with regards to the last 18 months in particular, with reduced staff and maybe increased business levels?
Well, in fact we had some. It was more during, well, we're to these situations very different among the last year that everybody was experiencing. Maybe as I say, some crisis about they will lose the job or not. In some places it was very hard because we didn't know that how we'll be recovering all this situation. But the stress came this year because with more flights than ever and the same staff, we have to say that it was very difficult to find specific staff to do the handling in our company, because everything came so quickly. And due to the regulations, the Spanish regulations, as we have still people stopped or without their permanent jobs, they didn't have what we didn't have. We were not allowed to hire more people in some places. It was something very tough to deal with, and it was some people reported fatigue and overstress situations. Yes, almost in the summer, almost in July and August. That was the peak of the season. Definitely, yes.
Martina.
So this past 18 months, we went through such a challenging economy times, and we had fatigue cases before, and we have fatigue cases now. Burnout, fatigue. It's just the reasons for this, what triggers this fatigue, what triggers this burnout might be completely different, or at least has different aspects or different general overview when you look at the reasons for the fatigue. Because when we're talking about fatigue, we cannot just say one person is fatigued. I think the most important parts when you have staff that are burned out or fatigued is actually to come to the reason, to find the root cause for the fatigue, and to make sure to offer all necessary support to the employees. And this is actually, I'm glad that somebody posed this question, because this is such a good question, and it also links to another thing. And we must not forget that this whole situation had a huge impact on mental fitness of all of us, not only frontline personnel, that at the end of the day, they have to be on the tarmac, they have to tow the aircraft, they have to operate daily with the ground service equipment, performing high safety risk tasks. So yes, we have seen fatigue before. We can see fatigue now, and I think this is again the time to invest into our employees, to really connect with them, to really make sure that they are doing well.
Thanks, Martina. And that's something that, you know, with the system, the management system in place that has fatigue management, it has a good human factors element as well, so that you can understand what fatigue looks like and train your staff to understand what fatigue looks like, helps you through this sort of thing. The other thing that we're hearing a lot of is that, you know, to employ staff now from scratch is going to cost you a lot more money in terms of hourly costs today than it did 18 months ago, because people have realized that they can go and flip burgers or they can go and work somewhere else for the same sort of money that they were getting working in a high pressured ramp environment, airside environment, without the risks and without having the oversight on them. So we're starting to hear that from certainly some places in the world where employing staff is now becoming a challenge, that the costs of employing good staff is significantly higher today than it was in the past because of the pandemic. So again, that's something that we may see in the future, and it also reflects directly in the costs to you as a ground handling service to provide those services. So anything else the two of you would like to add to wrap up? We're coming up to the close now of this session. So, and Adina, anything from your side?
From my side, I am happy to have been listening. I took quite some notes here. There would be nothing for me to add at this moment. Thank you again, Terry.
Okay, thank you. And there's just one more question that's come up here is, operators have been complaining about the increased regulatory burden so much that attaining compliance took more time than managing their daily business. Do you experience something similar? It's a very, very good question, that one. And I think that's one that's going to come out from the oversight in particular, where it looks like what we've got to try and avoid from all of this regulatory oversight requirement coming out is that we're now looking at oversight by customers, that's the operators. And we heard earlier on in the session that there is an obligation on the operator to provide oversight of their outsourced services. The aerodromes, you're part of the services provided at an aerodrome, so they have an input into your oversight as well as a ground handler. And now we're talking about the authorities having that. And what's interesting with the authority side is that some of the conversations, and please interrupt me if I'm getting this wrong, Adina, but it seems like some of the regulatory authorities want to extend that oversight where you may be handling aircraft that are under the state of registry of that competent authority as well. So you may not just be seeing oversight from your competent authority, but from the competent authority of the registration of the aircraft that you handle. So there are some things there that we need to consider going forward to make sure that we can, that this regulatory burden isn't too much on us as a sector.
Indeed, this is an issue. I haven't heard about this, the one that you just mentioned, Terry, an oversight from the state where the aircraft is registered. That didn't come to me yet. Instead, some more frequent questions that I received recently were coming from the aerodrome operator side, asking about continuing monitoring of the compliance of ground handling service providers, and I am trying to make things clear and to explain that with the future ground handling regulation in place, the ground handling service providers will be given the possibility and obligativity to ensure their own compliance monitoring, checking, and system, which means that it is expected in the future to have less oversight activities on the side of the aerodrome operator to the ground handling service providers, because this is now the responsibility to be fulfilled by the ground handling service provider itself and by the competent authority. Also, for the aircraft operator to do the oversight or to check the compliance of the services provided by the ground handling service providers, we also hope that we will see a decrease of such audits in the future as well, for the same reason. Where probably things will not change so much in this respect will be the services provided by ground handling service providers which are not located on aerodromes. So that will continue to remain under the oversight of the aircraft operators under the contracted services requirements in Regulation 965. But for the ground handling providers that do provide services at aerodromes, this is again, we expect a decrease in such audits and inspections from the aircraft operators. Let's hope that this will happen in the future, because this is one of the aims for this regulation, to ensure a quality safety level that would be acceptable in order to reduce the number of audits from the other organizations.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're about time, and unless you have anything to add, Karina, or anybody else from EBAA, I want to thank Martina, Adina, and Jose for their input today. I want to thank Karina and the team at EBAA for putting this event on. Again, pretty much at short notice. I think everybody was looking forward to going to Cologne, and particularly enjoying the Christmas markets there as well in the downtime. But putting this on virtually has been a real bonus, I think, to at least get everybody in. And I don't think we lost too many people. So thank you for everybody listening in, and thank you, Karina. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you very much to our panelists, Martina, Adina, and Jose today. Thank you to our sponsors who had been kind enough to support us even in these challenging times. And what can I say? Thanks to all of the attendees that joined us today. For those of you who are not familiar, we have a safety newsletter. It's called Be Safe. If you want to be kept in the loop, please send us an email at safety@ebaa.org, and we will put you in the distribution list, so you will get all of our newsletters and alerts. And thank you once again for attending. We will make the recordings for the afternoon sessions available soon on our website, ebaa.org. And again, if you have any questions about the event, or if you have any questions for our speakers, please send them to safety@ebaa.org, and we will make sure to get back to you with an answer. Thank you once again, and a happy holiday season to all of you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.